Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Professor Sides. This course is Principles of Microeconomics. We are in Chapter 3, Interdependence and the Gains from Trade. In the previous lectures, we spoke about interdependence, absolute and comparative advantage. And in this lecture, we will analyze this concept called comparative advantage. Again, we are using as our example the countries United States and Japan, and we were talking about the production of wheat versus computers given our finite resources, which were in this case 50,000 labor hours. And what we learned as a result of this lecture is that both countries could produce both goods, wheat and computers. However, because of comparative advantage, which we will look at more in depth here now, we found first and foremost that both countries were better off if they traded. The gains that they received, the United States, remember from our previous lecture, the United States had a gain from trade of 20 computers and 200 tons of wheat, and Japan had a gain of 10 computers and 100 tons of wheat. And so we're going to now talk about this thing called comparative advantage. And again, by definition, comparative advantage is the ability to produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than another. So as you are training to specialize in your field of study, you are training so that you can develop a comparative advantage over those other individuals to produce a good or a service once you leave our institution. That's at an individual level, which is mentioned in the textbook, as opposed to at a national level or an economic level, societal level, as in this lecture, the United States versus and Japan. Again, let's revisit this what comparative advantage is. Here's our definition. Remember that we must be aware of the opportunity costs associated with production in order to determine whether comparative advantage exists and for whom, and then to determine if or what to specialize in. And in our lecture example, in the final analysis, what we know is that the opportunity cost for a computer is 10 tons of wheat in the United States, 5 tons of wheat in Japan. And also know this, we don't have to have absolute advantage. In this example, we have absolute advantage. It would be in the United States. The United States has absolute advantage in both the production of wheat and in the production of computers. But that's in theory. This worked out in theory. But the reality of it is you don't need absolute advantage to have comparative advantage. And as a result, you can still trade. You can still trade. Comparative advantage is what's necessary for trade, not absolute. Finally, in this lecture, many assumptions were made. That happens when we are discussing theory or the principles in a textbook. But in the real world, the application side of it proves different because, or can prove different because we are given or can measure some of those variables that we assume in theory. And we make those assumptions so that we can better understand the concept, the principle overall. In Chapter 9, we will discuss real-world applications and then compare Chapter 3 and Chapter 9 to the case study that I gave you in class for both chapters. This concludes our Chapter 3 lecture. I look forward to speaking with you again soon.